The drip counted out the seconds like a metronome for grief. Tanya's rags slipped from her fingertips, slapped the polished floor, and she heard her own voice shatter the hush. The Roman 4 is poisoned. In that sterile room of glass and light, a 19-year-old girl did not yet know she was seconds from vanishing. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. When silence breaks the 8th floor had a particular kind of quiet. It was the quiet of wealth and worry, of scented flowers replaced before they wilted, of monitors tuned low out of respect for donors accustomed to soft things and softer voices. Tanya had learned that quiet over 15 years. She knew how to work within it, to slip past it like a shameful thought, to make rooms gleam without surfacing in anyone's memory. But she surfaced now. The Roman 4 is poisoned. She said it again when no one moved, when the nurse at the foot of the bed blinked, when Dr. Reed, head of neurology, lifted his palm at her the way one might halt a disobedient dog. "Ma'am, control yourself," he said, low and clipped, as if the words had teeth that might leave a mark on his reputation. "What do you think you're doing?" Tanya's gray uniform shifted around her like smoke. She was small in the expensive room, made smaller by the angle of every gaze. But her eyes, ocean dark and unblinking, were fixed on the bag. The liquid inside had clouded the way breath fogs a window on a winter day. A fine glitter clung to the plastic like frost. "I know the smell of bitter almonds," she whispered, her throat burned. Her feet did not move. "Please, if I'm wrong, you'll have lost nothing but a moment. If I'm right, she'll have lost her life." Behind Reed, Dr. Olivia stood with arms folded, mouth lined with annoyance. In the vinyl recliner by the bed, Dr. Warren Mitchell, CEO, father, his white coat wrinkled like his sleepless face, lifted his eyes with the disbelief of a man who has grown used to control, and then with something worse. Fear slid under his ribs like a blade. She was improving, he said to no one, to everyone. Her vitals stabilized. "Who hung this bag?" The nurse's eyes flitted toward the chart like a trapped sparrow. "Standard protocol, sir," she stammered. I, Abigail, her hair still matted at the back where the crash had tried to erase her, twitched. Her lips trembled on some bridge between worlds. The drip kept its count, indifferent. Reed moved to block Tanya with his body. "Security," he called toward the door, "remove her from—" "Stop the drip," Dr. Mitchell said, and the steel in his voice surprised even himself. He did not raise it. He didn't have to. "Now." Reed hesitated. It was the single beat that might have ended a life. The nurse reached, hands quick with fear. She clamped the line. The drip's metronome choked and fell silent. Tanya could not hear her own breath over the rush of blood in her ears. The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the building were a ship taking a slow turn. She knew there were cameras in every corner. She knew this room was not for her. The marble, the orchids, the soft spoons, the restless father who was also a king. But she stood as if someone had stitched her shoes to the floor. "Call security," Dr. Mitchell said. "Isolate that bag, and someone bring the tox kit now." He stopped, swallowed hard so the word wouldn't catch, wouldn't sound like a bad memory. The nurse moved. Reed whispered, absurd, but there was a tremor in it, like a crack running through ice. Olivia exchanged a glance with him that said too much in too little time. Abigail shivered, eyelids fluttering. The monitors hiccuped. Tanya folded her hands to stop them shaking. And then, as the room seethed into motion, call buttons stabbed, footsteps barking in the hall, the soft thud of a tray set down in the wrong place, Warren Mitchell's eyes found Tanya's. The CEO vanished. The father remained. Something in him slipped, something like an apology, like a plea. "Who are you?" he asked, not unkindly. "Tanya," she said, because that was the first thing she had in the world. Housekeeping. Chapter 2, 3 weeks earlier, 404 a.m. The hospital at 4 in the morning was a different country. The floors gleamed because they wanted to, not because anyone had noticed. The vending machines hummed like old women humming hymns. In the pediatric ward, a night light shaped like a cow spilled a little yellow on the nurse's shoes. Tanya liked it this way. It was the hour when the things that would later be hurried became precise, when a person could take stock, a loose vent, a mislaid chart, a grieving man asleep with his cheek on a blanket. She owned that hour. It was the only hour of her day that felt like hers. She had a routine up from the basement with the cart, extra gloves tucked into her pocket, a hair tie around her wrist in case her snapped like the day her mother died. To the elevator, to the 8th floor first, because the rich didn't like to hear other people working while they slept. The doors slid open on a corridor washed in the soft gray of almost morning. Usually, the head night nurse would be at the station, pen between her fingers like a metronome. Usually the only voices were the ones speaking in beeps. Not today. You understand what's at stake, a man's voice said, tense enough to violin string. The board votes next week. If she survives and talks, everything is lost. Don't pressure me, Reed, a woman replied. We cannot blunder this. There are cameras, records. Warren has planted himself there like a tree. Tanya's shoes stopped. Her hand tightened on the cart's handle. Her heart, the part of it that knew this building by heat map, by scent, turned toward room 805 without her permission. There are ways, the man said. Unexpected complications happen. Every day, Olivia. I am aware of what happens, Olivia said, the word bitten. Choose one that doesn't explode in our faces. Choose something that hollows a person quietly. They were two of the hospital's untouchables. Tanya had cleaned their offices. She had lifted their diplomas to wipe the dust and seen their lives in rectangular frames, an alumni day, a ribbon cutting, a child's drawing with medic hero spelled wrong. Villains never looked like villains in real life. That was the first truth her mother had taught her. Perhaps, she told herself, because she always tried to fill gaps with hope. They were discussing an ethics case, palliative care, the gray area between suffering and mercy. She was ready to rewrite the story in her head until the man said a name that crossed out all the plausible lies. Abigail, the sound of it landed like a glass dropped in a church. The accident was convenient, Reed continued, an accountant of catastrophe. But recovery invites memory, and she was not drunk, she was not the careless child they think she is. She was sober and scared and, I said I'm aware, Olivia cut in, sharp as an incision. We will be careful. Tanya didn't realize she had moved until the door to the staff bathroom slid behind her, and she was breathing quietly inside like an animal in a trap. For a long minute, she counted her own inhales and exhales against the whir of the ventilation, the breath that had accompanied her through 14 years of inhaling bleach and exhaling the things she could not say. Abigail Mitchell, the girl with the laugh that sometimes frightened birds in the atrium. The one who had once brought Tanya a cup of coffee and apologized when her friends rolled their eyes. Everyone knew she'd had a bad crash 2 weeks ago on rain-slick roads. Everyone knew Warren Mitchell had slept in his office and forgotten to shave. Everyone knew these things the way everyone knows the weather. Now Tanya knew something else. Knowledge was a heavy thing in her hands. It had weight. It made her palms ache. She returned to her rounds. She cleaned the room where the senator's wife slept under a cashmere throw. She straightened the magazines in the room with the movie star who never looked you in the eye. She saved 805 for last and knocked softly even though no one ever answered at that hour. Inside, the machines murmured. Abigail lay still, a crescent bruise at her temple, a deep plum now, ripening toward yellow. Warren had fallen asleep in a position no body was meant to hold, spine twisted, mouth slightly open as if catching whatever words fell out of his dreams. As Tanya wiped the bedside table, she spoke without meaning to. This wasn't new, she often talked while she worked. My mother liked to say that the night smells different in hospitals, she murmured, half to the long patient shadow at the window, half to herself. Like worry warmed up again, she thought about telling him. The words stepped to the edge of her tongue, her job stood there too, tiny and fierce, and the other thing, danger, leaned in the doorway, waiting to be invited. She said nothing. She cleaned. She left the room with its orchids and its sleeping father and the girl who, she now understood, was living inside the eye of a storm. Chapter 3, The Watching. You cannot hold a storm away with your hands. Tanya tried anyway. She rearranged her schedule, made it look accidental. She chose the elevators that would open on 805 at unexpected times. She learned the rhythm of the nurse's shoes. She memorized supply cart inventory, kept track of what disappeared and when. She began to wear the smallest earrings she owned because the big ones clinked when she leaned, and she wanted to make less noise. Brenda, the nurse with the tired kindness of someone who had outlived 5 hospital administrators without learning to pretend to like the 6th, gave Tanya a smile each morning. "You're early," she said. "New boyfriend." "New insomnia," Tanya replied. She learned to ask questions that sounded like jokes. She learned that jokes made you invisible in a different way. People don't suspect you if they are laughing. 5 days after she heard the whispers, Reed exited 805 with the smile of a man who has just slid a heavy thing from his shoulders without anyone noticing. He wrote something in the chart with quick, practiced strokes. He used to be charming in the way of thieves. Now she saw the thief under the charm. "You seem pleased," she said to Brenda when Reed disappeared into the elevator. He would be. "She opened her eyes last night," Brenda said, and Tanya wanted to hug the older woman and shake her at the same time. "She asked for her father, asked for somebody named Blake. She'll be transferred soon if she keeps it up." Reed's footsteps echoed in Tanya's head long after the elevator swallowed him. Transfer. Soon. Now, these were the words that made men like him hurry. She left work that day with her cash folded small inside her shoe because she did not trust the world. She returned the next morning even earlier, a gray shadow in a gray hallway, a breath waiting to become a scream if needed. Chapter 4, the countdown at 5:15 a.m. The corridor shifted. It was subtle, a hush that was already a hush somehow fell further. The temperature by the wall vents cooled half a degree. It was enough. A man walked toward 805 carrying a small case. He wore a lab coat. He could have been invisible if not for the way his eyes skittered when he scanned the hallway. People who belonged here never looked to see if they belonged. Tanya remembered the first night she worked alone. She remembered trying to look like she had always been there. She remembered the part of her that still hasn't. He slid into the room. She stepped close enough to peer through the narrow window, heart climbing up into her throat. He was at the side table, the place where medicine lives until it goes into someone's body and is no longer a bottle. He opened the case. He did not make a single wasted movement. Either he had rehearsed or he had done this before. Warren slept in the chair, an exhausted man folded to make himself smaller in a room that wanted him gone. Sometimes if you dream a thing you can stop it when it comes, as if the dreaming had trained your muscles. Tanya let the door breathe on its hinges. She slid in like a thought you wish you didn't have. She walked, not ran, to the stand and pinched the line until it stopped singing its slow song to the girl. The man's head snapped up. They were close enough now for her to see that his eyes were the gray of concrete and tidewater. "What are you?" "Stop," she said. Her voice was stronger in the room than it had been in her chest. "Step back." He didn't. He flicked a glance at the sleeping father at the door. For a heartbeat, he assessed whether he could knock Tanya down, whether a maid could be overcome without consequence. He chose retreat. He slid past her with a cold brush of shoulder and was gone. "Dr. Mitchell," Tanya said, and then louder, "Dr. Mitchell." The father woke with the panic of someone who has been waking like that for weeks. He was on his feet before memory caught up with him. Confusion and anger tangled in his mouth. What are you doing? Who are you?" "Please," Tanya said, fingers steady on the clamp now. "He injected something into your daughter's line. I saw him. He had a case." What?" He came over, not believing and already believing, because the part of him that was a doctor had a separate brain, and that brain had noticed things his father brain couldn't stand to notice. The slight shift in color, the way a sour, sweet ghost of a smell hovered in the air, the crystals like winter at the bottom of the bag. He didn't ask her how she knew. He acted. He flagged the nurse with a thumb to the alarm. He disconnected the bag as if defusing a bomb. The room changed temperature again, this time warmer, movement strobing. He spoke into the handset like a commander. "Security to 805. Lock down the building. Isolate all access points, and I want eyes on the 8th floor service elevator now." Abigail stirred and her mouth moved. He bent close and heard something that might have been Dad, something that might have been a cough or a prayer. He set his hand on her hair. It was the one thing he could do that did nothing and everything. The nurse arrived, then two more, then the head of security. Then Olivia, hair scraped back into a bun so tight it hurt to look at, and Reed, whose face arranged itself into horror like a mask hung up backwards. "What happened?" Olivia asked, voice tight as piano wire. "A man, lab coat, early 40s, light hair, came in and accessed my daughter's line," Warren said without preamble. "This bag is contaminated. Lock the hospital now, and someone get me the lab director on the phone." Reed's mouth formed a careful question mark. "That's not possible," he said, which was not the same as saying it didn't happen. "It did," Tanya said. She found that when she had already spoken the worst truth, the other truths were easier. "I saw him." "What are you doing in here?" Reed demanded, turning the rage he had meant for someone else toward the movable target. "You are not authorized. Neither was he," Warren said. It was not a shout. Reed shut his mouth anyway. The bag was sealed and labeled. It looked innocent, weighed nothing, and demanded everything. A guard carried it as if it might explode, and in a way it already had. Chapter 5: The long-haul news travels in hospitals the way it does in villages. It is a living thing. It finds vents and hallways and the spaces between two people who shouldn't be standing that close. Before the hour was over, the cafeteria knew someone had tried to harm the boss's daughter. The ER knew. The billing office knew. Housekeeping knew because housekeeping knows first and last. By mid-morning, there were two separate wars raging. One was inside the lab, where chain of custody forms multiplied like rabbits and everyone's hands smelled like sanitizer. The other was inside Warren's skull, where the father and the CEO fought while the doctor tried to referee. Reed shadowed the hall like a ghost who was not ready to go. He said unfortunate and impossible and shocking to the right people at the right times. Olivia arranged for extra nurses for 805 and a counselor for the family, and she did it with such brisk competence that someone who didn't know better would have thanked her for caring. Tanya saw their choreography and felt both wonder and disgust. It takes talent to ruin a thing this thoroughly while appearing to save it. In the afternoon, Brenda found Tanya behind the linen closet door, eyes focused on nothing, a stack of towels clutched to her chest like armor. "You did the right thing," Brenda said. "Did I?" Tanya asked, because the world did not immediately reward the right thing. It rarely does. Brenda hesitated. "They'll try to make it like you're the problem, but you're not invisible anymore, love. That's the trick, isn't it? Harder to erase something once it's seen." Tanya nodded and held that sentence the way you hold a hand. Chapter 6. The first twist the bag came back with a lab report attached and a hairline crack in the hospital's spine. "Contaminated," the print said in black letters that made people sit. Warren read it once and then again, as if the words might change into a benign paragraph about harmless saline if he stared hard enough. By the time the evening news asked if the city's prestigious hospital was safe, security had caught the man in the lab coat on a camera crossing the courtyard at dawn. He had exited the building through a door accessible to no one but staff. He lifted a badge as he went by. The badge had belonged to a nurse who had resigned 3 months ago. She had left quietly, a personal reasons note plugged into the rumor well. She'd been seen lately in a part of town where pills changed hands the way cigarettes used to. They arrested her the next day at a motel that smelled like old smoke and new lies. Under questioning, she gave them a name that curled on everyone's tongue like something sour. Reed. He denied it with a strength that surprised even his admirers. He had an alibi for everything but the part of his soul that had rotted. He spoke about funds for research, about a future he'd nearly built, about enemies jealous of his support at the top. He cried once, either because he meant it or because he was excellent at playing the part. He hinted at lawyers whose suits cost more than a year of someone's life. Olivia did not cry. She moved carefully now, like someone crossing a floor with glass hidden in the carpet. She said, "Let the investigation run its course," into microphones and patted Warren's arm at a meeting, because she had always been good at touching people in ways that looked like care and were really a measuring. 2 days passed. Abigail's vital signs steadied again. She opened her eyes in the night and said, "Dad," clearly, and then "Blake," and then she wept without sound. Warren's relief nearly broke him into pieces. On the third morning, a second lab report arrived. This one contradicted the first. No contamination, it claimed. The bag was as clean as a Sunday morning. The toner had barely dried by the time someone whispered that the lab director had been seen having coffee with Reed 3 months ago, their heads bent conspiratorially over the paper like lovers reading fortunes on the table linen. Warren did something then that he had not done in years. He stepped away from his corner office, away from the board table with the long shine and the view of the lake, away from the black car and the driver. He stepped into the hospital like a man walking into a storm to bring someone home. He pulled out a thread that had been woven so expertly the rest of them weren't supposed to see it. "Test it again," he said to a different lab across town, the one with less money and more integrity. "And test this too." He handed over the glove that Tanya had used to clamp the line. Brenda, suspicious of how quickly truth gets laundered, had thought to bag it herself. The results snapped the rope back into his hands. The bag was contaminated. The glove carried traces that matched. The first lab director resigned before lunch, his statement a legal quilt that covered nothing. "Why would someone do this?" a reporter asked Warren outside the hospital, and something in him finally broke. "Because our building looks like a temple," he said, "and temples attract not only the devout but the thieves." Chapter 7. Memory returns. Abigail's recovery was a stubborn, unbeautiful thing at first. It looked like shaking hands trying to hold a spoon. It looked like fear widening her eyes when she saw a road on television. It looked like sleep interrupted by nightmares with no plot. On the 5th day after Tanya's cry, Warren asked the nurses for 10 minutes alone with his daughter. He sat beside her bed. Her hair had been washed. He had shaved. Both of them looked raw and therefore more themselves. "You called me at the party," he said, "New Year's Eve." Abigail closed her eyes as if looking at the inside of her own skull might show her a movie. "It was at Reed's house, wasn't it?" he continued gently. "The one by the water." She nodded and then shook her head and then nodded again. Tears slipped out without her permission. "I went upstairs to find my jacket," she said. Her voice was a feather. "It was hot downstairs, laughing and people making promises, champagne. I remember I opened the door to the study by mistake. There was a table, not food, paper. A cooler. They laughed like they were in on a joke I was too naive to get. Olivia said something about expediting candidates, and Reed said, 'You're sentimental, Olivia. Money saves as many lives as ethics does.' And there was a list, Dad, names with stars. They said a boy waiting for a liver down on the 3rd floor was not optimal, but a man who donated to the wing could be helped. They used the word help like it meant something good." She gulped air. "I left, I think," she shuddered. "I think he saw me, Reed. He'd always watched me like I was a pet someone else brought home. And then after midnight, I started the car. It felt off, or maybe I was off. I don't remember a tree or a truck. I remember headlights like breaking glass." He took her hand. He had held thousands of hands like this across decades, and none felt like this one, his baby's, impossibly small again. He stood when Tanya knocked, then paused in the doorway as if uncertain which man he was, CEO or father. "Come," he said, and meant it. He had started to learn, finally, who knew the hospital's true secrets. The people who took out the trash always know. "I'm sorry," Abigail said to Tanya in a voice that cracked like ice. "I should have said thank you before. I heard you in here when I couldn't talk. You told me you were scared. It helped. It made me feel less alone." Tanya blushed. No one had ever thanked her for talking while she cleaned. It was the oddest feeling, to be seen for something you had always done in order to feel like you existed. Chapter 8. The second twist. It would be nice to say that after the report and the arrest and the tearful bedside confession, the story wound down. But rot runs farther than you think. It winds around foundations. It hides in ducts. The day before the board vote, Warren's security chief, loyal, broad, with a laugh like a busted drum, was caught on camera slipping a thumb drive to a courier behind the loading bay. "If the guard of your gate sells the key, the enemy lives in your house." The drive contained patient lists, transplant schedules, a network map that traced flights to other cities where money and organs both flowed off the books. The man in the lab coat sang like a bird for his freedom, and he sang a harmony that included names no one expected, a procurement coordinator who danced with Olivia at a charity gala, a transplant fellow who had made his mother proud and then made her ashamed, a girl at the front desk who thought she was just pressing send. Reed was escorted out of the hospital in a suit the color of a storm cloud, his cufflinks glowing like small suns. Olivia stood at a window and did not move for a long time. When they finally came for her, she turned without argument. Later, when a reporter cornered her lawyer on the courthouse steps and asked why, Olivia's attorney replied in a tone that might have been her own if she'd allowed herself regret. Because sometimes people think they are building efficiency when they are building a grave. Warren resigned from his board chair that week. He walked into the boardroom where he had once squeezed extra dollars for equipment that hadn't made it down to the 5th floor and said, "I can't pretend I didn't know there were cracks. I like the quiet more than the truth." The confession didn't absolve him, but it did widen the door for something different to walk through. Chapter 9, The Things That Save Us. 2 weeks after Tanya's shout, she was called to an office she had vacuumed 100 times without once being asked to sit. She paused on the threshold as if the room might spit her back out. Warren rose from behind his desk not as a king, but as a tired man trying to make a small space holy again. He was beside a wheelchair where Abigail sat, thinner but with a light in her eyes that wasn't there a month ago. The orchids in this office were less absurd now. "Tanya," he said, and his smile reached the place where smiles go when they mean it. "We wanted to thank you, properly." Abigail reached out. Her hand was warmer than Tanya's had been in years. "You saved my life," she said, "and I heard everything when I was away. You told me about your mother, about how you wanted to wear shoes that didn't squeak on this floor while you answered a call. You told me you wanted to be a nurse." Tanya felt heat flood her face and then her throat and then something under her ribs. "I talk too much when I clean," she said automatically, and then, because this was not a time for automatic answers, "Yes, I wanted that." "We can't give you back the years," Warren said. "But we can give you the chance the hospital should have offered you before it needed your courage. Full tuition, books, a schedule that lets you finish while you work if you want to, and another thing." He pulled an envelope from his drawer and placed it on the desk like an offering. She didn't reach for it. A check could not cover what had been split apart here, the trust, the lines between the touched and the untouchable, but it could stitch a corner. "I didn't do it for money," she said, and she saw in his eyes that he already knew. "I know." "That's the point," he replied. "And there's more. We want you to work with us, not as a token, not as a poster child, but as someone who knows the building like a map only you can read. We need safety protocols that start with the truth that everyone can see something. Everyone, doctors, nurses, kitchen staff, housekeeping, especially housekeeping." She swallowed. She had thought of 1,000 things to say in the days since, practiced speeches while mopping hallways. The one that came out was simple. "I'll do it if we do it right," she said. "If we build the kind of place where a person like me can shout and not be dragged out before they're heard. Where we teach people that miracles start with someone noticing a small wrong thing and trusting their own eyes." Warren nodded like a pupil. "We'll call it the Tanya Protocol," he said, and she almost laughed because it sounded like something from a science fiction movie and also like a prayer. Chapter 10, Rebuilding the City watched as the hospital chose to be honest on television, which is a kind of miracle. The story spread like a stain and like light. Other hospitals called and asked for a copy of the new policies. Papers were published, heads rolled, new heads balanced on shoulders that felt their weight. Tanya wore her own clothes the day she walked into the building to help lead her first safety training. She carried a backpack weighed down with textbooks that made her feel like a teenager and a general at the same time. The staff from housekeeping lined the hall and clapped, not like a ceremony they had been forced to attend, but like family. Brenda squeezed her elbow. "Make them listen," she said. "I intend to," Tanya replied and surprised herself at the calm in it. In the room where she had once wiped away a coffee ring only to have someone set another mug in the same place, she stood in front of a row of white coats and ties and said, "This is our hospital. Ours." It belongs to the sick, and to those who carry their trays, and to those who read the numbers, and to those who empty the bins. We will make it so that a person can bring the smallest worry to the right place without being punished for caring. They called it the Tanya Protocol in their emails because it was easier to type than make the institution less arrogant, and because it mattered to attach a human name to the system. It included listening sessions that did not end in punishment. It included a hotline run by people who did not work for anyone in the building. It included quiet moments where a nurse could say, "I smell something wrong," and a doctor could answer, "What do you smell?" without embarrassment. The first time a new hire hesitated to call a code because he was afraid to be wrong, Tanya stood behind him and said, "I'll be wrong with you," and he hit the button and a woman lived. 6 months later, the garden seasons pass in hospitals in ways the calendar can't mark. You know it's spring when people bring in tulips that lean toward the windows. You know it's fall when the nurses start drinking cinnamon in their coffee. The summer in between those seasons was the busiest some of them could remember. It was not a busyness of crisis, but of building. 17 professionals were indicted across 3 hospitals in as many states. A federal grand jury said words on the news that most people hadn't known before. Now they did. Organs arrived where they were supposed to go. Drugs stayed in the cabinets. Lives ticked back like metronomes that no longer counted down to grief, but counted up to days. Abigail traded economics textbooks for anatomy. She scribbled in the margins of her notes the way she used to scribble song lyrics. She came to the hospital in scrubs and tied her hair back and apologized when she bumped into a doctor in the hallway. "I will not apologize," Warren said when she said sorry to a wall once, and she laughed like she had laughed when she was small, like bells. She and Tanya ate peaches on a bench in the hospital garden one afternoon, juice running down their wrists like a promise. "I can still hear you sometimes," Abigail said, looking at the leaves move against the white of the building, "from when I was." "Wherever I was." "What did I say?" Tanya asked, thinking of how many secrets she had dropped into rooms, imaginations who might have gathered them. "That you were afraid," Abigail said, "that you were going to do the right thing anyway." Tanya looked at the windows where she had seen herself reflected for years, a smudge on glass. "It's easier when someone else is afraid with you," she said. "I learned that from you." A week later, the American Nursing Association called. The words sounded like they belonged to someone else: award, courage, inaugural, your name. Tanya sat down in the break room because her knees were suddenly unreliable. The refrigerator hummed. Someone had written "don't touch" on a yogurt. She felt large and small and real. "What will you say?" Brenda asked, drying a spoon with a napkin because the dishwashers were overwhelmed with joy. "I'll say what my mother told me," Tanya said. "It's not the position that matters, it's the decision, the one when no one is clapping yet." Epilogue: an unforgettable room on the day of the ceremony, the auditorium filled with people of all kinds. It wasn't just doctors and nurses. The security guard with the soft heart who read on her lunch break sat beside the cafeteria cashier, who sometimes slipped an extra biscuit to a child who looked like he needed one. The men and women who shined floors sat in the front row because Tanya asked them to sit there. Warren spoke first. He did not make it about him. He talked about a building that had tried to be handsome and had learned to be good. He talked about a daughter. He talked about a woman whose courage had carved a path. Abigail followed. She was steady. She told the truth without theatrics. She looked at Tanya when she said, "You taught me that medicine isn't only what happens in operating rooms. It's what happens when a person who has no reason to risk her quiet steps into someone else's storm." Tanya was next. She wore a dress that made her feel like herself, not a version of something else. She took the stage and the podium seemed to shrink under the weight of what she carried there. She didn't have a speech written. She had a life. "I used to think that to be a hero you had to be invited," she said. "You had to be wearing the right clothes, you had to be announced. But heroes never look like heroes when you need them. They look like someone who mops a floor, who pushes a stretcher, who shares their sandwich, who sees a small thing and says it out loud." She paused. "I shouted. I did not whisper. I was terrified. Fear and courage are neighbors. They share a wall. This hospital taught me how loud fear can be. The people in this room taught me how loud courage can be. We will fail again. That's the truth. But we will fail less loudly and less often if the people who smell something wrong, who see a shadow, who notice a sound, if they are told you belong. You're not a maid in this story, you're the person who turned the page. She left the stage and did not feel smaller. The applause did not embarrass her. It turned into something else, a current, a rising. In the audience, a young woman in a housekeeping uniform cried softly and tried to hide it behind her hand. Tanya saw her. She waved. Later, in the corridor outside 805, the one she still cleaned sometimes on purpose, even though no one would have asked her to, she stood in the doorway and breathed. The room held none of the terror it used to. It was ordinary. It was perfect. The orchids were a little ridiculous again, and that felt okay. The drip in this room counted seconds again, but they weren't a countdown now. They were a metronome set to hope. On the whiteboard, a nurse had drawn a son with a face. In the chair by the bed, a father slept without guilt, the way a man sleeps when he finally knows the building he loved can love his family back. Outside the window, the hospital garden moved like a living thing, wind and leaves. A child walking slowly between flowers, a student in scrubs reading under a tree. Tanya tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and turned back to the hallway, where a man in a crumpled suit asked her where the cafeteria was. "Second floor, west side," she said. "Thanks, miss," he replied, already moving. She smiled. He hadn't recognized her. The city would forget her sometimes. That was right, too. Heroism shouldn't require a spotlight. It should make the places where we live and work bright enough to see without squinting. As she walked toward the elevator, she passed the plaque near the nurse's station. The letters were simple. The words were not carved in gold. They didn't need to be. The Tanya protocol, see, speak, protect. At the hospital, the CEO daughter was dying until a maid cried out. And the rest of them decided, at last, to listen. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on how small acts of courage can change lives, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own value. And tell me where you're reading from. It's beautiful to see how far a single voice can travel.